Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. It is episode number 102, and we are back to talk about the Herons, conspiracy theories, transfer rumors, and everything else that's been happening in the world of Inter Miami. I'm your host, Scotty, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Saur. Saur, how are you feeling tonight, my man?
As always, I'm doing great. We've been doing these player breakdowns, and it almost feels like we've been chatting every single day, talking about those players.
Yeah,
But it feels like we haven't done this in a while.
it
When was
has
the
been a
last time we
while.
did a podcast?
It's been
Yeah,
almost
it's
2
been a
weeks.
while. And I see we have upgraded graphics and a new look and everything. Is this even Drive Pink Dialogue? Where am I? This is all new, man.
We are in a transformative period, trying to get all set for the start of the season. And so we're testing out some new things, including some graphics, and that's what you guys see. Tell us if you like them. Yeah, I mean, it's been 10 days. We were doing this like every 3 days for the entire offseason, and then the season kicked, and now we've been doing pre-games and post-games and stuff. And so we haven't had a chance to sit back and sit down and just talk about Inter Miami and the things that are happening on the bigger picture. And so now some of the topics we're going to go over tonight are going to feel old, but we've never actually discussed them. And I'm not sure anyone really discussed them in the type of detail that I think we're going to get to tonight, because I think there's some very interesting points to be made that I didn't hear because a lot of things we didn't really go too deep into, or most people didn't go too deep into. So let's start with some of the quick hitters. As of yesterday, still no visa for Maxi Falcone, Gonzalo Lujan, or Telasco Segovia. Those three all officially signed. They're all Inter Miami players, but they have not gotten their work visa yet. So they still are not able to participate in training, still not, as of today, eligible for Saturday's game against Olympia down in Honduras. So it feels like we're getting to a point where Inter Miami is not really going to be able to use them on Saturday. And I think that means they're not going to be able to use them for game one against Sporting Kansas City. It's tough.
Yeah, as an international myself, I know exactly how frustrating visa issues can be. And especially as fans, we just want to see these players play. We just want to see what they're made of, talk about new players. And it's just so frustrating when administrative stuff like visas can hold up a player debut. I think in the grand scheme of things, this is slightly worrying as well, because we're going to be playing a competitive game of football very soon. Well, 18th is our first game. We constantly spoke about embedding all these players earlier as much as possible during the preseason, and we've only yet seen two players, Allende and Fafa Pico. So slightly frustrating, but I'm not too worried because I think this team is quite capable of beating Kansas City without some of our new additions. We'll see. Hopefully they get embedded soon. And you know what? A visa can come any day now. Saturday is the game, so we still got a couple of days before this can happen. Hopefully it's as soon as possible, because I just want to talk about Maxi Falcone, Telasco Segovia, and all the new incomings that we're going to have this season.
Yeah, we've been doing these season previews, and we've been pushing off the new signings because we haven't gotten a chance to see them yet. And it hasn't happened yet. So I don't know what we're going to do if we don't get a chance to see those guys on Saturday. I see in the chat that Jordi Alba is going to be suspended for that first game against Sporting Kansas City. That is true. He got a red card against Monterrey in that second leg last year. So he will serve the suspension for that game on that first game day.
Who didn't get
February
a red
18th.
card against Monterrey? It feels like everyone got a red card. I only remember David Ruiz getting a red card.
David Ruiz got a red card and served his suspension in the second leg.
Oh,
Jordi
yes.
Alba
We
got
lost
a
our
suspension,
heads
got a red
when
card.
we lost
Yeah.
4-1, 4-2. I've forgotten that game. I've wiped it out of my memory, so I don't remember any of it.
3-1. And that one was the most pitiful goal I've ever seen. Diego Gomez got a header in like the 84th minute. The tie was already over, and him running back to restart was just so pitiful. But yeah. Okay, other news. Federico Higuain, former Inter Miami player, has been the B team coach for the last couple of years. He has moved on to the Columbus Crew. He's now the head coach of the Columbus Crew 2. This was weird. I never thought he was doing a tremendous job, but nice guy and real professional. So, and not to say he was doing a bad job. The team was really poor 2 years ago. I think they might have been the worst B team in the MLS. But I think a part of that was because guys like Kermaski and David Ruiz were sort of unexpected graduates to the first team. Last year they were better. They made the playoffs, but still, I'm not sure if Inter Miami can do better or not. Fede moving on is, I think, an opportunity for Inter Miami to get a little bit better in their B team coaching staff and maybe get a little bit better in their development. Obviously, everyone that's coming from Barcelona understands the importance of having a strong academy. So we will see what they can put together with the new academy staff. And so that's news. But the reason I thought it was interesting is because he's going to the Columbus Crew 2, which are known as one of the best academy programs in the MLS. So maybe I was underestimating how good he was if Columbus Crew 2 want him. Speaking of the B team, Giovanni Farina, who was a weird pickup that Inter Miami added last year, was on loan to the B team. He's back on loan with the B team. He's an Argentine on loan from, I believe, Boca Juniors. And he's back with the B team. I don't know what to make of that.
He's one for the future. That's what it is.
I never
Maybe 5 years down the line when we're talking and doing this post-game show, he might be on the starting 11. Who knows? Keep that player in mind, though.
I never knew what to make of it last year. I still don't know what to make of it, but he's back, and maybe he'll get a chance this year. I don't know.
Sometimes things don't make sense, and we just have to live with them. Eventually, they might become clear. Eventually, he just maybe moves on, goes back to Boca Juniors. We don't know. We don't know what it is. Seems to be a decent enough player for our B team. I don't think he's first team material at this point in time at all. So we'll see. But surprises might come through, and he might be a player for the future, and they might be considering him for a future first team contract.
Yeah, it's just weird because that was a guy that Tats Martino and Chris Henderson brought in, and they're gone. So I don't know, but whatever. Hopefully he's a good, I guess. Lawson Sunderland. I mean, I just say that to say it's a name to keep in mind. And in fact, going back to our bingo card, I think he was on the bingo card. So we should update that before the season starts.
Are we still playing bingo, by the way?
No, because we got a draw. Although I will. Well, we'll just leave it at we got a
technically,
draw.
I think I won, but we'll see.
I think actually it's technically we got a draw, and then like in reality you won.
Yeah.
Okay, Lawson Sunderland, former B team, former A team player. He signs with FC Dordrecht in the second division of the Netherlands in the Eerste Divisie. Congratulations to him. Good luck. I think he came out of the Bayern Academy, so he was always going to have suitors. And you know, his 200 minutes that he played last year are minutes that the midfield can collectively replace. I think giving up his spot on the roster is going to allow guys like Santi Morales and maybe Tyler Hall, Israel Boatwright, an opportunity with the first team, and maybe a guy like Bailey Sparks or one of the draft picks. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we get into the big topics is Inter Miami got another international roster slot today from San Diego. I think they've got 5 now over the course of this offseason. That brings them to 13, I believe, which is what they need for the current roster. So as of this moment, they are ready to be cap compliant. Not cap compliant, but international roster slot compliant. So that's the rundown. Anything that we talked about that you want to go into deeper detail?
13 international slots. That might actually be a record in the MLS. Does any team have more roster slots?
They had 16 last year.
Okay, good.
And they're probably going to need
a lot of roster
They're
slots.
probably going to need 16 this year as well. I am sure we're not done getting those, but for the players on the roster right now, this is satisfactory, and we will, have to get more as we add another player or two. And we've heard some new names today that I think are really interesting. We'll talk about. But before that, let's talk about this front office shakeup, because on, January 27th, there was a Tom Bogert bomb that dropped, and everyone in Inter Miami knew it was kind of a big deal, but also no one knew how or why or if it was a big deal. And that was Raul Sanyehi was reassigned to a non-sporting director role at Inter Miami. And Inter Miami called it pre-planned. But about 5 minutes later, it was also reported that he had a spat with Lionel Messi during the Club America game. In the post game, he was on the team bus when he maybe shouldn't have been. And lo and behold, not long after, he was reassigned. What was your first thoughts when we got into this? Actually, before that, let me just say this. We don't know what happened. We don't know how this affects Inter Miami. We don't know exactly what Raul Sanllehi was doing. We know basically nothing, but that is not going to stop us from talking about it.
And having at least an hour-long conversation about
yes,
it.
at least 20 minutes.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to this?
And this is all speculation, so let's just start with that. Honestly, I've never heard the word reassign before in this context for someone who's moved on from their responsibilities and forcibly moved on from their responsibilities. What's his new role? That's the first question I have for you, and then I'll give you my initial reaction.
I think his new role is stay on the sidelines until Messi's gone, and then you can come back and do what you were doing before. That's what I think. But I'm just guessing.
Basically, he's sitting on the couch playing Football Manager for the rest of the season, or
no, for the next 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone soon, honestly.
Yeah. First reaction, utter chaos. Absolute and utter chaos, because we've just changed our sporting director. Chris Henderson has moved on. We've brought Raul Sanllehi. We've created this entire backroom staff based on the assumption that Raul Sanllehi is going to lead us. He's the one who's going to be doing the recruiting. He's the one who's going to be making sure the roster is compliant to MLS rules, bringing in new faces, doing the scouting. He was the face of the backroom project, right? He was the face of the project from the administrative side of things, or at least that's how it seemed like they're projecting him. When Jorge Mas had his conference, Raul Sanllehi was there. Chris Henderson was in the back room. He wasn't even seen anywhere. So it seemed like Raul Sanllehi was the one being pushed forward.
Definitely.
Out of the blue, he's gone. So this was definitely not pre-planned. Well, I don't think it was pre-planned. And it's something that's happened in the back, in behind the scenes that we're not aware of. I don't want to feed in too much to the rumors about him and Messi having a falling out, but I think there's been a falling out, and it's just unfortunate.
That's been reported by MLS's most reliable journalists. So
exactly, and
it happened.
It's really bad, I think, behind the scenes, because it just goes to show that there's a lot of chaos and power struggle at this club, which never really is good. Thankfully, we have the players on the pitch who can produce results, but if it was any other time in Inter Miami's history, this could have been very chaotic. And honestly, I don't even know what it means for the rest of our transfer window, because right now it feels like the signings have dried up a little bit.
Well, and that's what I wanted to talk about, because we spent so much time in the early portion of the offseason saying we don't know about Raul Sanllehi. We don't know about Javier Mascherano. What are their signings going to be like? Can they do this effectively? Can they do this efficiently? And I don't want to say we were critical, but I think we were keeping a very critical eye on how they were doing in case we saw signs of them messing up. And then they got a big deal for Leo Campana. That was nice. They also let Matías Rojas go for free. That was weird. And so we were just kind of up for debate. And every podcast we would talk about, how is Raul Sanllehi doing? How is this front office doing? And then basically Christmas came and went, and it all started firing. December 29th, Fafa Picault agrees to a deal with Inter Miami. January 1st, Tadeo Allende agrees to a deal with Inter Miami. January 6th, Gonzalo Lujan agrees to a deal with Inter Miami. January 10th, Velasco Segovia agrees to a deal with Inter Miami. January 14th, Maxi Falcone agrees to a deal with Inter Miami. January 14th, Rocco Rios Novo agrees to a deal with Inter Miami. The Fafa one became official on the 7th. Allende on the 14th, Lujan on the 16th, Segovia on the 17th, Rocco Rios Novo on the 16th, and then the 18th came. And that's the night that Inter Miami went to Las Vegas and played Club America, and apparently the spat between Messi and Sanllehi went down. And then it stopped. It all stopped, like immediately. Not only did it stop, the deal that we had already finished, Maxi Falcone, that took a long time to become official. So from the 18th to February 1st, almost nothing happened from a front office perspective. We weren't even really being connected to names. We weren't hearing stories about potential players Inter Miami were going after. And I think some of that became clear on the 27th when Tom Bogart breaks this story, but it takes 2 weeks from the day of that spat for the Maxi Falcone deal, which had already been agreed to become official. So for Inter Miami, I don't think there's any doubt that Sanyehi was clearly in charge of this offseason, was making moves left, right, and center. And it was a lot of fun. And I was going live at 2:00 in the afternoon to talk about these. Like, it was awesome. And then it just dried up. So I think we have to say, I think we can say with relative certainty that Sanyehi was in charge and was activating a plan that he had built, he and Javier Mascherano and whoever had built. And then he's no longer in charge and everything just kind of grinds to a halt. Do you agree with that?
I do. I do agree with that, but I want to push back a little bit on it because I'm seeing certain comments that I think do make a little bit of sense. Maybe we're drawing conclusions from something that may not be causation, right? Yes, signings have dried up and it's coincided with Raul Sanyehi being pushed to the sidelines. But maybe the signings have dried up, because we got most of the players that we wanted to, at least at the initial stage of the transfer window, and the rest of the signings that we have in the making aren't necessarily that important or will take some time. So maybe our primary targets are already secured and that's why it's taking that long. I think Tony mentions in the chat that there's always a team behind the sporting director, so it's not just one person. Yeah, that's, I think, a really good point, and maybe we're reading too much into this. I just wanted to bring that point across just to give us a little bit more of a rational and comprehensive discussion to this. But I actually agree more with you than I agree with Tony here. I think there's definitely something going on behind the scenes that has impeded some of our moves coming in now at this point in time. I almost jokingly thought to myself that maybe the visas for some of these players haven't come through because Raul Sanyehi, out of spite, decided, you know what, I'm just going to hold on to these visa applications and keep them in my drawer and not send them out. So again, don't want to read too much into this, but it definitely seems like there's something going on that's not very healthy behind the scenes. And I just hope that doesn't impact us on the pitch throughout the rest of the season, because it's never good for a club to be in a bit of chaos. And maybe if this was any other club, it would never have been reported out. And just because Inter Miami is so big, that's why it's being reported so openly. But it's definitely something that should be talked about. And I think we might be reading too much into this, but there's also a case to be made that there is some issues behind the scenes.
So listen, there are other things that have happened that could also be responsible for this. I saw some people say Neymar, and he was responsible for getting Neymar. I think he was like the key figure to get Neymar to Barcelona way back when. So the relationship was there. And okay, sure. You could also say that the signing window hadn't really gone the way they expected. Maybe the names that they were bringing in weren't quite big enough, right? We are looking at all these new signings, excited to see what they have, but maybe the front office is saying, these were like plan B and C guys. Why didn't we get our plan A guys? Maybe they blamed that on him. Like, there are other factors that could have gone on behind the scenes, but I think it felt from the outside perspective, from my point of view, that Raul Sanyehi and Javier Mascherano spent 6 weeks after the season building a plan, and then as soon as Christmas finished, they started executing, and they were doing it effectively. We'll see if the players they brought in end up being like quality players, because again, I think we feel good about Fafa, but basically every other signing we have no idea about. Even like today, Allende, who we've seen, we're not 100% sure he's going to be good. So we'll see. I will also say the Baltasar Rodriguez thing stopped around that time. And so it's not just the players we signed. It was the players we were in negotiations with. It was, we had that whole conversation about if Jordi Alba's the third DP, and that's why everything has grinded to a halt. We'll talk more about that in our next section, but it just felt like everything was going as planned, and then something happened and everything kind of halted for a while. So I think we needed to talk about it. And again, me, maybe more than you, was very critical. Again, I don't want to use the word critical. I wasn't criticizing what they were doing. I was just saying, like, this might not work, and you have to keep an eye open for that. And I was very cautious about it. And I think they were proving me wrong. And I was getting on board with what they were doing because it clearly looked planned and executed in an effective way. And so I was really excited about what they were doing. And now it's over. And so turning that to Guillermo Hoyos, we have to do the same thing with Guillermo Hoyos, or at least I have to, because that's how I genuinely feel, but also just to be consistent. The Raul Sanyehi era is over. And whatever you thought of Chris Henderson and whatever you thought of Raul Sanyehi, like you have to hold Guillermo Hoyos to the same standard of bringing players in and making it work with the roster and making it everything fit in an effective way and giving yourself flexibility to make it better moving forward. Like all of those things are still important. And so all of the goodwill that Inter Miami's front office built up with me over the past month when they were bringing in all these guys and it looked so well orchestrated is gone again. And so I think that's what we should talk about next. This is Guillermo Hoyos. He's mostly been a coach. He was Messi's academy coach at Barcelona when he was, coming through the ranks. So he has a long relationship with Messi. He came to Inter Miami at the same time as Messi and was supposed to be part of the academy. Clearly has been part of the backroom staff. So he's not coming in fresh. He knows what's going on, but this is the new guy. And we now have to, again, say, does he know what he's doing and can he do a good job? And so, again, because of how consistent I was about being cautious about the new staff, I need to do that again. And I want to do that again because I think it's true. These guys have to re-earn that trust.
And it's not just about this transfer window, is it? This is a long-term strategy for the club. We have to think about the future as well. So decisions that we make in this transfer window could potentially lead to consequences in future transfer windows. And I think you have all the right to think not critically about it, but be cautious about it and be a little bit skeptical, because unless proven otherwise, you should be skeptical about how the performance is going to be in terms of bringing in new players and in terms of scouting players. So yeah, for sure. And it's never ideal when you have to make changes in the middle of a transfer season as well. I don't think any other club willingly would change or pre-planned would change their sporting director in the middle of a transfer window. So there's definitely something that's gone on behind the scenes, right? And now that we have changed the sporting director, whose responsibilities are to make sure that our sporting ambitions are met in the right way, you have to be cautious about it and you have to be critical. And unless we get some business done this transfer window, especially towards the latter half of the transfer window, things might be a little bit bleak, even though we started off really well.
Yeah, and listen, again, I'm not saying that he's going to be bad. I hope he's great, and I have no reason to think he's going to be bad. Yeah. But again, I think this is back to square one in terms of earning trust. I see some people talking about how Inter Miami was just finished with their business. I don't think that's the case, honestly. I mean, they were signing new players every 3 days, and then it just stopped out of nowhere. I don't agree. And also, people are talking about how these are Javier Mascherano signings. Sure, Mascherano wanted them, but Raul Sanyehi was the guy going to other clubs and negotiating with them. And it's not about finding players. That is a collective effort, but actually being the one negotiating, that is sort of the top 2 or 3 people that are doing the negotiating and making sure everything fits and making sure they are the ones making the responsible decisions and not going out and spending too much on this player or that player, or giving this player too long of a contract or too short of a contract.
Exactly.
Like those are the decisions that the people at the top have to have the final say on, because they're the ones that are going to be held responsible for it. So I get it's a team effort, but the person at the top has to make the final decision, is the one making the part of the negotiations, is leading the negotiations. So all of those things are turned over now. So,
and it's not just about bringing the new players in, right? It's also about who to keep, who to let go, who to extend for long term, what their contracts need to be. It's a big role. It's not just bringing in players for this transfer window. That's a very short-sighted way of looking at it. So I do hope that this new appointment works out for us in the long term, but I think this is a very short-sighted move by the club, and it almost feels like we're being reactionary in how we're appointing certain people and making certain decisions about firing or keeping people on. So,
well, and I'm not criticizing it. I'm not criticizing it. If someone's a bad fit, move on. If someone has a problem, move on. Like, I get it. I'm just saying that as fans, we have to start over in terms of the trust building process with this front office. And I think that's important to say. It feels like the first five or six signings, the first 6 signings of this transfer window are the Raul Sanyehi era at Inter Miami, and everything from here on. short-lived, but everything from here on is going to be more related to Guillermo Hoyos. So that's different, and I think that will lead us into our next conversation nicely. Anything else on this, though? Because again, it's been 10 days. We still don't really know. It's been more than that, actually. We still don't really know how this is affecting things in the front office, but my guess is that this happened on the 18th, 19th, and then they decided, let's take a week with our new team and replan, maybe 10 days, and replan what we want to do with the rest of this window. And that's why just now,
or not replan, but at least get on the same page about it and just take a step back and reevaluate, I guess.
And so now that team is ready to come out and start making moves again. So I think we might actually get a more exciting transfer window from this point on, based on a new team looking at new players, trying to be, whatever. And again, if one of the reasons Sanyehi was let go is not just the Messi thing, but also because maybe he wasn't ambitious enough with his earlier signings,
that's perfectly understandable.
Then we might see some more ambition for the rest of this window. So all of that's possible. It could end up being a great thing. Like, I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing. We don't have any idea, but I thought it was worth talking about in a little bit more detail, just because.
Yeah, and again, just to preface this was speculation. This is opinion talk. We are discussing this because we don't have the hard facts with us, and that's what we do, right? We talk about things. So you may disagree with certain things, you may agree with certain things, but I think this is a very important conversation to have just for the long term as well. And it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the transfer window proceeds, because I'm sure we're going to have not this exact conversation, but elements of this conversation in the future as well, especially when the window closes and we evaluate how it went. I think this is going to be an important, maybe inflection point in how the window proceeded. So I'm hoping we get some new players in, and I'm sure we're going to get some new players in. It's just going to be a matter of when and how many, and how derailed our plans were because of this slight change in the backroom staff.
And again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It could be a great thing. So
exactly,
I don't want it to be pointed that way. But and also, I specifically wanted to start this conversation by saying we don't know anything. But that wasn't going to stop us from talking about it. So yeah, we still don't know anything, but I thought it was.
Well, we spent 20 minutes on it, so I think that's good enough.
Okay, let's talk about Alan Obando, because this is the big news of the day. And Saur, I'm afraid to talk about it. I'm afraid to get excited about it, because this is an incredible young talent and has now been connected to Inter Miami in a way that feels at least somewhat serious. And I hate to bring up players like this, because oftentimes there's not enough information. It's just at the very early stages. It's nothing to be worried about from our perspective. But this is such an exciting young talent. I couldn't help myself. Alan Obando, 18-year-old from Ecuador, plays for Barcelona in Ecuador, Barcelona de Guayaquil. And he is like one of the brightest young prospects in South America. He is a striker, so he would fill that role. And I'm excited to go over everything I think about for this transfer, or for this potential transfer. But go ahead and give me your initial thoughts. I told you to do some research on him today. What do you think about Mr. Obando?
Guys, I think we're going to do something different for this particular section. I'm going to mute my mic and sit here while Scotty goes on a 2-hour rant about how much he loves this player. I was warned before the podcast started that Scotty can maybe get a bit emotional talking about this certain player. So maybe we should give him his moment and let him go on a bit of a rant. No, you indeed told me how to do some research in this particular player. And boy, am I glad, because I spent 30 minutes, 1 hour just watching highlights from him, looking at his stats, seeing what he's made of. I didn't need that long. I needed 2 minutes and I was on my feet and applauding, because my goodness, this looks like an exact kind of a signing that this team needs at this point in time. Another Ecuadorian striker, very interesting, but somebody who's big, strong, can hold up play, seems silky, really good dribbler, runner, athletic, strong. I've already said that. Big, I've already said that. Has a really good shot in him as well. Great finisher, target man, everything that we need, everything that Luis Suarez is not. That's probably all the notes that I have on him, but very exciting. Very, very exciting.
I said when the offseason started that if they if they moved on from Campana, that the backup striker would be worse than Campana. And I think Campana is a better player today than Alan Obando is. But this would be the kind of incredibly exciting signing for a backup striker and a U22 DP that would be just incredibly exciting in a way that I think Inter Miami would satisfy my demands for excitement and ambition. We just talked about the new staff. Maybe they are a more ambitious bunch, and so they're seeing an opportunity here to land a really, really talented young player, and they're going for it. Here's the deal with him. He had an agreement with Atletico Madrid to go to sign with them last week for $5 million, 5 million euros, something, one of those two. And the plan was for him to be bought by Atletico Madrid and then loaned out to their sister club in Mexico. And it turns out the sister club in Mexico, I think it's Atletico San Luis, didn't have an international roster slot or a foreign player slot, as they call it, available. And so they couldn't make this happen. And so Atletico Madrid didn't seal the deal on that signing. Of course, the Spanish window is closed. That's not going to necessarily stop them from making this happen. It is still possible, but it does open the door to other teams, and I'm sure more than just Inter Miami are interested in making this happen. But Inter Miami, was reported today, did come in with a $3 million offer, not quite the $5 million they thought they were getting last week. And also just on a first offer, I think Inter Miami could and should go up to $5 million to get this player. If this happens, I would be going live 20 minutes later, and it would be unbelievable to me. It would be the best signing of the window.
Just to put this into perspective, I want to give you a hypothetical. If we were to pay $8 million or $8.5 million, which is more than what we paid for Redondo when we brought him, would you be okay with that?
Yeah. So here's the thing. It's up to him. It's up to him and his plan, right? Because we'll talk about this in a minute, but if his plan is to come to Inter Miami for 18 months, then that's a different story. But if you're coming at 18 years old, I think you're coming for like 3 or 4 years. And then, yes, definitely. The other thing.
So that's how highly rated he is. We would break the bank for him. And I think we should, because he looks very, very promising.
Now, we wouldn't have to. There's no reason they wouldn't accept a $5 million offer, right? But yeah, and he would be your long-term Luis Suarez replacement. He would come in and help you immediately. He's ready to go. I will say, he's 18. Most of the guys we brought in that are U22s are like 20, 21, and that is a big difference. But this kid is really advanced for his age. The U22 rule allows you to stay as a U22 up until you turn your age 24 season. So this is a player that could be here for a long time or could go for a really big transfer fee a la Diego Gomez. But I'm just, my head is everywhere because I have so many exciting thoughts about this transfer. So I will stop. I'm consciously trying to stop myself and give you an opportunity to speak.
This is your moment, man. This is where you need to go on the rant. I've allowed it for this one episode.
Yeah, well, he's big. You mentioned it. He's like 6'2", 6'3", good size, decent, is a good athlete, target man, silky on the ball, good technical ability, has a good ability. He's got good shooting prowess. And he's already played for the Ecuadorian national team. He is really good. Go ahead. Sorry.
I looked at his heat map, and it's so interesting because the majority of his positioning was actually slightly over the halfway line, slightly over the halfway circle, which means he drops deep quite a lot to link up with the with the midfielders. And I can already imagine a scenario where him and Messi link up so well because he does this thing where he drops deep, collects the ball, pops it off to the midfielder, and then the midfielder just picks it over the defense, and he's just making that run in to get in behind the defenders. That's exactly what Messi loves to do. I don't think Luis Suarez, even though he used to do it a lot, I don't think he's able to do it anymore as much just because of his age. This player itself is just so well suited to everything Inter Miami needs up top as well, as backup to Luis Suarez. That I think it makes perfect sense.
And he's young and raw enough that he will develop in different ways too. He's not a settled player. It's just so exciting. Now, let me go through potential downsides. I remember Matthias Pellegrini and I remember Julian Carranza. Those two came to Inter Miami before the club's first game. They were 18, 19 at the time, 18 years old at the time, and they were supposed to be this. And they weren't ready. They were too raw, and they couldn't have an impact yet in the MLS, and so they couldn't get the game time they needed to develop, and ultimately they failed at Inter Miami. Carranza made it work at Philadelphia, but Pellegrini had to go back to Argentina before he really got his career going, and I'm not sure he really has yet. So there is I want to be clear, an 18-year-old is different than a 21-year-old, like the Diego Gomez that we've gotten, or Federico Redondo, Facundo Farias. There's a huge gap there in terms of your development and your maturity. But I think this guy is just at a different level in terms of his prospect tier than those guys. I think this is a guy that would come to Inter Miami and scouts would come to watch him play, not just because he's Messi's teammate, but because they want to get a look at this kid. He's already on the Ecuador national team. So this is a kid that everyone who watches him thinks very highly of. I think he is destined to go to the big 5 leagues in Europe. And so if Inter Miami can get 2 years out of him, at 3 years even, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Do what you got to do. And he fills the backup striker need that we have. And so to me, it's such an ideal signing. It's really just a matter of, can Inter Miami convince him this is the right move? And to me, that's the biggest question right now, because I think there should be no doubt about Inter Miami should have no doubt about going above and beyond to make it happen. It's just a matter of, can they convince him to come to Inter Miami when there will be suitors in La Liga or Italy or England or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a chance. Definitely. We have the project here. We have Messi, who's the most attractive prospect to bring all these youngsters in. So it'll be interesting to see. I really hope it comes through, because we talked about what kind of striker Inter Miami might be looking at, whether it's an older striker. It has to be a backup to Suarez for sure. But this is it, man. This is a signing that we get for the future, and that's exactly the kind of person I want on my team, because next year I think he contends for that first team.
Well, not just the future, but for the now too, right? He still has his role, and we saw Campana got 2,000 minutes last year and scored some incredibly important goals. So I think he would be just the perfect signing. Okay, so what does this mean for Inter Miami? If they're willing to spend $3, $4, $5 million on this guy, that means he would come in as a U22 DP, which means Inter Miami has an available U22 DP roster slot. This is something that we weren't sure about the last time we really had a conversation like this, because someone floated out the idea that Jordi Alba was on a DP contract now, and that would make Inter Miami ineligible for the 2 and 4 sort of setup. But with Segovia, with Redondo, and with Toto Aviles, if they are in the 2-4 setup, they still have one slot available. And this is the type of big signing that they should be going out trying to make happen. So I'd love it. I also want to mention real quick that they looked at Matthias Pellegrini, an Argentine player at Platense, 21-22. That guy ended up getting sold for $12 million. So if they were willing to do that, they would be willing to do this. So I think they can definitely do it. Real quick, Sean says that Kremaski is a U22. Remember, he signed last year. He's not a U22. He was put in that status because it fit the weird roster rules, but he doesn't have to be a U22 this year. He won't be a U22 this year. His salary doesn't demand that. So you can kind of push that to the side.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just excited. I'm going to run out of breath. Go ahead.
Now, I was going to say that rumor about Jordi Alba died quite sadly. I mean, not sadly, but quite quietly. It was one rumor one day. Maybe there's some truth to it. We still don't know, because it hasn't been floated out since. But this seems like it's probably not a reality. And at the time, I was a little bit confused, and I didn't think why that would be the case. But the fact that Inter Miami is actually even looking or contemplating to bring a player like him, because the $3 million bid has been confirmed, right?
Yeah, well, it was reported today.
Yeah, so that means we are able to make that deal. And that just shows that we do have that U22 DP roster slot available, which is great. Great news for us.
Yeah, I think so. I think it definitely means that. And it also means that we have some allocation money available. I know we've been spending a lot of it on international roster slots, but I think they're well stocked for the resources. And that's why with 2 open roster slots and the financial wiggle room to make signings happen, that's why I think there's no reason to think that they were done with signing players when the Saniahi news broke. So I think they took 2 weeks with the new team to kind of get organized and get on the same page. And now I think we're going to see them go out and trying to acquire a backup striker, yes, but also maybe a wing player, maybe a number 10, something like that. Maybe another, like, who knows what they could be doing now. And it starts really today with Alan Obando. Okay. Anything else? I mean, I think
needed
it's
to
super
take a
exciting.
bit of a breath there.
I did need to take a little bit of a breath there. I think they should go get this kid. I would be so happy if they got this guy. I think he would be my signing of the offseason. And to me, he fits so many.
I object. I still haven't seen Segovia play for this club, and I think he's the second coming of Messi. So maybe we have a difference of opinion there. We'll see.
No, and Segovia is my favorite signing right now, but I think Obando would really take that. Okay, let's talk about the Leagues Cup and the U.S. Open Cup, because that also became official, because it's been that long since we last lost you. It's been that long since we last went on a podcast. The Leagues Cup and U.S. Open Cup were announced as a joint announcement of who was going to participate in what. The U.S. Open Cup is bringing more teams into the fold this year, which I think is a good thing. We talked about when the roster rules were changed earlier in January, how this might open the door for Inter Miami to get back into the U.S. Open Cup, or for the MLS to get back into the U.S. Open Cup. That was announced. 16 MLS teams are going to participate in the U.S. Open Cup, and a further 10 MLS Next teams are going to participate in the U.S. Open Cup. Inter Miami is one of the MLS Next clubs. Inter Miami 2 will be in the U.S. Open Cup. Their debut game is Wednesday, March 19th. They're playing Miami United. So hopefully they can win that game, and we can see them play a little bit more. But that'll be at the beginning of the March international window.
Yeah, I think for this tournament, I'm looking forward to 2 things: seeing who's actually going to be on that roster slot, on that squad for the B team, and how far they actually managed to get. Because we may have a few players who might be signed on for the first team who would potentially be playing the US Open Cup, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And if they beat one team that we don't expect to beat, I'll be really happy with our performance. I think that we need to just beat that one team that everyone thinks we might lose against. And that, I think, would be a successful US Open Cup run for Inter Miami too. I don't expect that to happen, but it'll be really fun. I'm definitely going to be watching it very closely.
Yeah, and I think just based on levels, Miami United would be the favorite to win that game. But I will say Miami United is the worst. Last year they were the worst team in the USL Championship by a lot, by like 20 points. I mean, it was an embarrassing season for Miami United. They obviously have had a chance to rework their roster this offseason, but I would love to see Inter Miami 2 win that game and advance. Guys like Rocco Rios Novo, Tyler Hall, Santi Morales, Leo Afonso. But even, the Leo Afonsos and like some of the older guys could be a part of that.
Busquets can do with a bit of a run in the Inter Miami 2 team.
I don't know about Busquets. Maybe we're saving him for the semifinals, but yeah. So I think that'll be fun. I have been a big proponent of the US Open Cup, so I might have to drag you into doing a watch along or something for that.
No, I'll be down for that, man. It's one of the oldest cups in the continent, and it has history. That's what I love.
Yeah. I want to get to Leagues Cup in a second, but I think Jay asked a really interesting question in the chat. How's Miami looking for the summer transfer window? Do they need to leave spots open? Well, the interesting thing about Inter Miami's roster right now is they have some flexibility. As we speak right now, David Martinez is set to leave the club in the summer. So that would open up both an international roster slot and a senior team roster slot in the summer. And then you still have guys like maybe a Julian Gressel, or we'll see who doesn't really factor into the plans during the summer. But there are guys that have value on this roster that could be moved if you needed to open up spots. So there's a lot of flexibility. I don't think you need to worry about saving space unless you're saving like a DP spot for someone special. And we've talked about the Di Marias and the Neymars and stuff. If you had someone like that in mind, you could save one. But other than that, I don't think there's any reason to save a roster slot unless you just can't fill it with someone of quality.
Yeah, I think if the planning of this preseason, if this offseason has been done correctly, then there are certain players that they thought they're going to move on in this transfer window, like Matthias Rojas. And then there are certain players that they're thinking about moving on in the next transfer window. Because players like Grasso and Robert Taylor might actually have a role to play in the first half of the season. And we might think about bolstering those areas in the latter transfer window and not this one. So I think that's the smart strategy to go with. I'm hoping that's what the backroom staff has actually looked at and been like, okay, there's some players that we might want to move on this season and then this transfer window, and then some in the next transfer window. So you're absolutely right. Gressel's one to keep an eye out for. David Martinez for sure. Robert Taylor, I would say, is another candidate who might get potentially on the chopping block for being sold in the next transfer window. So that allows us to bring more reinforcements, different sort of reinforcements. And that's, I think, an interesting prospect. At this point in time, the roster is well constructed.
And by the way, I think any team that loses by the quarterfinals would be ready to enter the U.S. Open Cup at the appropriate time and already be out of the CONCACAF Champions Cup. So you're talking about like potentially 4 MLS teams that would not be able to do both because of their overlapping schedules. Now, listen, Inter Miami is one of the teams expecting to go deep in that tournament. So once the schedule came out, it became clear it was going to be very difficult for Inter Miami to participate in the U.S. Open Cup. I'm not complaining about it. I understand. But I do hope this is stepping towards Inter Miami getting back into that tournament for next year, especially as the Leagues Cup changes and, the Club World Cup is not going to be a factor next year. So we will see. Let's talk about the Leagues Cup. Inter Miami is participating in this, not a surprise, but there have been some changes, and I think we should go over them for everyone that hasn't seen yet. They're cutting the size of the tournament from all MLS and Liga MX teams to all Liga MX and 18 MLS teams. So now there will be 18 teams from both leagues participating, and they have changed how it's going to work. 3 games in the group stage, and instead of it being sort of a group stage, it's more of a league phase. You'll get 3 games as an MLS club against a Liga MX club. And whatever point total you can put together will be stacked against every other MLS team, and the top 4 MLS teams will advance. I don't know if that was confusing or if I explained it well. Saur, be my guide.
No, I think that made sense. So let me repeat that back to you just to make sure I understood. So each MLS team is going to play 3 games in the group stage against a Liga MX team.
Correct.
They will not then compete within their groups, but they're going to instead use the points and then stack all the MLS clubs and the Liga MX clubs against one another to see who's got the highest points, and the top however many teams are going to proceed to the next round.
Right. So all the MLS teams will only play Liga MX teams. All the Liga MX teams will only play MLS teams in the first phase.
Yes.
And then they will be stacked up as part of their own group, as part of their own leagues. And the top 4 Liga MX teams will go to the knockout phase. The top 4 MLS teams will go to the knockout phase. So this is much more difficult to get into the knockout phase. 18 MLS teams will go into the tournament, and only 4 will advance to the knockout stage. We'll get past 3 games. So you have to win probably 2 out of 3 games and maybe get 2 wins and a draw. Like, it's going to be tough for any team to get out of this group stage, which is a big change from last year where it felt, almost easy to get out of the group stage.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a tournament, at least in football, where this is the structure that they use to decide who moves on to the next next stage. So it'll be really interesting to see. And I think I agree with you that this might be really difficult. Even if you do win your own games, it might come down to not points, but goal differences and some minute differences between the teams that could potentially knock out somebody who has looked good. So I think Inter Miami needs to be on top of their game if they want to win the Leagues Cup, and if they plan to compete in the Leagues Cup well. They have to be on top of it from the group stage. It's no longer going to be a guarantee, we're going to beat the 2 Liga MX teams that are in our group and then we just proceed to the next round. It'll be much harder, and I think more interesting as well, because it'll be really interesting to see what the MLS teams stack up like.
Yeah, it'll be interesting from a couple of perspectives, because the games are going to be much more intense because very few teams are going to get through. on the other hand, all the other games happening in the tournament are going to matter much more because you're not going up against the team you're competing. Like, it's not a group stage where you have to beat the team and it hurts the team you beat and it helps you. The way you get through is how every other MLS team competes. And so you want to win and get points in your game and get goal differential or whatever the tiebreakers are, not because you want to eliminate the team you're playing, because you want to avoid being eliminated by all the other MLS teams. So it adds intrigue for the entire tournament, I think. I think it's an interesting move. We'll see how it plays out. But for Inter Miami, the difficulty level certainly stacks up. And remember, they're not doing a dedicated month to this tournament. It's going to be midweek games. So very interesting changes.
I hate to be that team that gets knocked out in goal difference. Absolutely despise it. I hope it's not Inter Miami because it will be heartbreaking, especially for a team who might be actually ambitious to win this cup. So, yeah, it's going to be spicy, I think.
Yeah, and remember, for Inter Miami, we talked about this with the Open Cup, but if you don't win the CONCACAF Champions Cup and assuming you don't have some incredible run in the Club World Cup, this will be your next opportunity to get real silverware. So depending on what we're at in the season and how our injuries are looking and how we did in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, this could be a really important tournament. Could be something we don't care much about. Could be something we're saying, but when the time comes, it could be incredibly competitive and something we feel like we have to win to get our season back on track. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I'm glad they made some changes. I thought the tournament would have gotten stale if we kept the same setup year after year. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah, we haven't seen something like this. So good shout for them to be creative about it.
Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about tonight is some of the changes that have been going around the MLS in terms of players in and players out. Let's start with, I think, the biggest outgoing player in the MLS this offseason, and that's Cucho Hernandez from the Columbus Crew, leaving to sign with Real Betis in Spain. That deal became official on the European transfer deadline day. $16 million, I think less than they probably wanted, less than fans thought he was going to go for. They bought him for $9 million, so it's not a huge profit. But that's probably, if not the best player in the league outside of Inter Miami, one of the top 2 or 3. I think he came in second for the MVP last year. So Columbus not having that player makes them significantly less dangerous. They also moved Christian Ramirez today. So I think Columbus has gotten worse as a team since the end of last season. And they were the big bad competitor for Inter Miami last year.
Yeah, they definitely have made more outgoing moves than bring in reinforcements. And maybe they're going through a reset. Maybe they consider this a bit of a transition season for them. I'm not sure what the thinking is. I don't want to jump the gun because there's still time until April for them to get their team in order. But yeah, it looks like Columbus might be a little bit thinner this year than compared to what they were last year and the last couple of years, honestly.
Yeah. And listen, they have Wilfred Nancy. I know they let some guys go in free agency like Alex Maitan and Yaya Boa, who were big to their success. So they're going to find a way to retool with Wilfred Nancy. They'll figure it out. They'll still be a good competitive team. But this is a team I think went from like competing with Inter Miami to win the East to hoping to get a home field advantage in the first round, being a top 4 team. And we'll see how they put it together. But listen, Columbus can be very dangerous when people start counting them out. So I will I'll give him a pass. Lucho Acosta for Cincinnati, another player that looks like he's on the way out. He has sort of broken up with Cincinnati. He hasn't made it official yet, but he's negotiating with some teams in Argentina. I wouldn't be shocked if some MLS team went and spent the internal, money in the internal transfer market to get him. But that's another key player, and he was the big guy for Cincinnati early last season. They looked like they were going to be a huge thorn in our side. They did go out and get Kevin Denke, which is a huge signing of a striker from Belgium. I think they spent $16 million on him. So a big signing. But if you don't partner him with Lucho Acosta, I think, you lose some of the
since he barely won any games without Lucho Acosta last season, their season fell off a cliff after Lucho Acosta got injured, I believe, and didn't play those games. So they're letting that talisman go, which is a big shocker to me. I didn't think that would happen this season. But another team that might be,
I think
I don't want to count. Yeah, sorry.
That one's player motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. So, yeah, I mean, good for Inter Miami. It's promising that they don't have Lucho Acosta, or they will not have Lucho Acosta this season. But again, if they've got a striker from Belgium who's they paid 16 million for. I wouldn't be surprised if they're okay in terms of scoring goals. They'll still be competitive, that's for sure.
Yeah, a couple other teams I wanted to mention are retooling. Well, listen, the Red Bulls are the defending Eastern Conference champions. I think they brought in a lot of guys last year, so maybe those guys take a step towards cohesion and maybe what we saw at the end of last season can kind of carry forward into this year. It's a team to look out for. And then Charlotte retooled with some nice pieces. They brought back Pep Biel. They signed Luis Zaha, former Crystal Palace winger. I think he's gonna be a real weapon for them this season. That was that winger that they've been looking for the last 6 months. And then Orlando City also retooling. They lost their best player, a winger whose name is escaping me, but they just brought in Atuesta from Palmeiras. They brought in a winger from I believe Croatia today, who's going to be a new DP for them. So they're retooling. So the East is in flux, and Inter Miami not the only team that's Facundo Torres. Thank you, Vice City. Lucas for that one. But the big one is Atlanta. And already Inter Miami has some history with Atlanta. They went out and spent big this offseason. We remember last summer we were counting them out because they sold Yakumakis, they sold Caleb Wiley, they sold Thiago Almada. They made $50 million. Well, they reinvested that $50 million. They got Alexei Miranchuk last year, who I think was their most dangerous player in terms of technicality. But Saba Lobjanidze is back. Pedro Almador at left back. He was incredible for them down the stretch. And then Brad Guzan had a second life in the playoffs. And then they went out and signed two huge names. Miguel Almiron, one of the probably 10 most talented players in terms of his peak in the MLS history. I mean, he was incredible for Atlanta back when he was here for the first time. So good that he earned the move to Newcastle in the Premier League and broke the transfer record at the time. He's back with Philadelphia after 5 pretty good years in the Premier League. And then they went out and got Emmanuel Latte-Lath, $22 million for the Middlesbrough striker, the new MLS incoming transfer record. That is a team with Chris Henderson at the helm that has absolutely bolstered what they have going on.
Can you just remind me when we're playing Atlanta? Because I'm just probably going to call in sick that day. I don't feel motivated enough to watch that game.
March 16th, right before the March international window, is Inter Miami at Atlanta, 3 days before Inter Miami 2 can make up for anything that happens there in the U.S. Open Cup.
Honestly, early favorites to potentially win the East and maybe win it all right now. They look phenomenal. And I'm not just saying by their new acquisitions. They already looked really good last season in the off season, at least in the playoffs. They were starting to gel together. You mentioned Pedro Amador, who basically every time he puts a cross in, he gets an assist. Miranchuk, who when he played into Miami, found his form and since then never looked back. And now they've signed Miguel Almiron. Never liked Newcastle, never liked him at Newcastle, never liked Atlanta, will not like him at Atlanta ever again. Yeah, they've got the pieces, man. They look very, very good. Chris Henderson is really doing his magic there. Good for them. But into Miami, whenever we play them, we'll still be the favorites to beat them. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I don't want to overhype it because Inter Miami is still going to be the favorites in the East, and they should be, right? Latte-Lath costs more to bring in than Messi, but Messi is obviously a much better player. But I do think they're going to be the team everyone's watching early on in the season to see how they
click. It's like LA Galaxy last season where we identified them to be the early favorites, and they did do really well. And I think this is same with Atlanta this season. It'll be interesting to see how they gel up, though. I'll definitely watch a few of their games before I make a outright judgment. But
yeah, we talked about with the Galaxy. We got them. It was good to get them early. We got them week 2, or actually the weekend of the first weekend of MLS last year. It was good that we got them before Gabriel Peck and Joseph Paintsill got settled in and really got going in this league, because by the time they did, they were going to be incredibly dangerous. We saw they went on to win the MLS Cup. They'll be back this year, although Puig does have that ACL injury. But I'm not worried about the Western Conference right now, really. I'm just thinking about the Eastern Conference rivals, and Atlanta has been the team that's retooled the most. And I'm kind of just excited to see what they have. I don't know about their midfield, but their front line is going to be really dangerous with Lobjanidze, Miranchuk, Latte-Lath, and Miguel Almiron. That's a lot of firepower. So Yeah.
Maxi Falcon with his hair is going to stop all of them.
That's why we brought him in, right? Our
Yeah, the
$2 million
superpowers are in the
defender.
hair.
Yeah, our $2 million defender to go defend a $22 million striker. Okay, Saur, anything else on your mind, Inter Miami? Anything you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
That was a lot of boxes that we ticked for this conversation today. I don't think I have anything more to talk about. I'm sure we're going to jump on sometime this week when and if there is another signing. But other than that, we have the preseason to look forward to, the game on Saturday, I believe. So looking forward to that. Every time Inter Miami plays, it's a fun day. So can't wait.
All right, guys. Our plan is to be live for the pregame show before kickoff against Olympia on Saturday night. And then we'll go live after and all that. But we will be out and about. If there is a signing that demands an emergency podcast, we're certainly prepared and ready for that. And if not, we will see you Saturday night for another preseason game. Hopefully Maxi Falcone and Velasco Segovia and Gonzalo Lujan get to make their debuts. I think that would help us a lot so we can start talking about them from a season preview perspective. But other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful night. We will see you guys next time. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this and have a wonderful day.